Camila was enjoying her night alone at home while her parents were away visiting relatives. It was rare to have the house to herself, so she decided to make the evening special. She made popcorn, wrapped herself in the softest blanket she had, and settled on the living room couch to watch that suspenseful series she'd been wanting to catch up on. Everything seemed perfect, the soft glow of the lamp created a cozy atmosphere, and the silence of the house was broken only by the sound of the TV. But it was in that very silence that something strange happened. A noise from upstairs caught her attention. It sounded like a footstep. She paused the show, held her breath, and sat completely still, trying to listen more closely. Nothing. Maybe it was just the wind or the house settling, she thought, trying to convince herself there was nothing to worry about. But then, a few minutes later, she heard it again. Slow, dragging footsteps moving across the hallway upstairs. Her heart began to race, and fear started to take over. She tried to rationalize, maybe it was an animal on the roof or even her imagination playing tricks on her. After all, the house was old, and sometimes these things happened. But no matter how much she tried to calm herself, something inside her said this wasn't normal. She decided to call her mom, who always knew what to say in these situations. With trembling hands, she dialed the number, and when her mom answered, Camila whispered, as if whoever was upstairs could hear her, "Mom, there's someone in the house." Her mom was silent for a moment on the other end of the line, as if processing Camila's words. "What do you mean? Did you lock everything?" she asked, her voice concerned but trying to stay calm so as not to scare her daughter even more. Camila quickly confirmed, "Yes, I locked all the doors and windows before I started watching the show. But I'm hearing footsteps upstairs. They're slow, like someone's walking back and forth." Her mom took a deep breath and said something that made Camila's blood run cold. "Camila, are you on the couch?" She hesitated for a second, confused by the question, but answered, "Yes, of course I'm on the couch." "Why?" There was a long, uncomfortable pause before her mom replied, her voice now tense, "Then who just opened the curtain behind you?" Camila's phone nearly slipped from her hand as she slowly turned her head to look behind her. The living room curtain, which she was absolutely certain had been closed when she started watching the show, was now wide open, revealing the darkness outside. But what truly terrified her was the reflection on the TV screen, a tall, distorted shadow standing right beside the couch, as if someone was there, watching her. Her heart raced, and her entire body trembled. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The shadow didn't move, but she could feel its presence, as if it were alive and aware, waiting for the right moment to act. Camila tried to get up from the couch, but her legs felt paralyzed, as if her body knew that any sudden movement could make things worse. The shadow on the TV screen didn't move, but she could feel its presence growing stronger, as if it were pressing against the air around her. The phone was still in her hand, and she heard her mom's distant voice calling her name from the other end of the line. "Camila. Camila, are you there? What's happening?" But she could barely respond. Her gaze was fixed on the reflection, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Suddenly, the shadow leaned forward slightly, as if it were getting closer to her. That's when she noticed something even more disturbing. The shadow didn't have a normal human shape, its outline was irregular, almost fluid, as if it were constantly changing form. Desperate, Camila finally managed to scream. The sound echoed through the room, and for a moment, everything fell silent. She looked back at the TV, expecting to see the shadow still there, but now there was only the empty reflection of the room. The curtain remained open, swaying gently in the breeze coming through the window. For a second, she thought maybe she had imagined it all. But then, she heard the footsteps again, this time closer, slowly coming down the stairs. Each step echoed through the hallway, as if whoever, or whatever, it was deliberately trying to scare her. Camila gripped the phone tightly and whispered to her mom, it's coming this way." Her mom shouted from the other end, "Lock yourself in the bathroom, now." But Camila was frozen in fear, unable to move. The footsteps were getting closer, echoing down the hallway toward the living room. She could hear the sound of something dragging on the floor, like nails or maybe a chair being pulled slowly. Her heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. She tried to stand again, but her legs were shaking so badly she could barely stay upright. The living room door creaked as it was pushed open slowly, and a cold draft swept through the room, making the lamp flicker. Camilla turned her head slowly, afraid of what she might see. In the doorway stood a dark silhouette, almost indistinct in the dim light. She couldn't make out a face or any details, just a tall, motionless figure blocking the only exit. Camilla tried to scream again, but her voice failed her. The figure tilted its head slightly, as if studying her, and then began to walk toward her. Each step was slow and calculated, as if it were savoring the terror it was causing. Camilla grabbed the blanket as if it could protect her and, with the last shred of courage she had, threw it at the figure before bolting toward the stairs. She knew she needed to get out of there, but the footsteps behind her began to speed up, as if whatever it was toying with her. Camilla ran up the stairs, stumbling over her own feet but not daring to look back. She knew the figure was right behind her, she could feel its presence getting closer. When she reached the top of the stairs, she realized she'd made a terrible mistake. She was now trapped upstairs, with no way out except through the bedroom windows. Desperate, she ran into her parents' room and locked the door, pushing the wardrobe against it as a barricade. Her phone was still in her hand, but the call with her mom had dropped. She tried to call again, but there was no signal. The only thing she could hear was the sound of something scratching at the door from the other side, as if trying to get in. Suddenly, everything went silent. The scratching stopped, and the air felt so heavy it was hard to breathe. Camilla leaned against the wall, hugging her knees as she tried to stifle her sobs. That's when she heard a voice whispering directly into her ear, even though no one was there, "You should never have looked." Before she could react, the moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the room, and revealing the same shadow she'd seen before, now standing right in front of her. Screaming in terror, Camilla squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the worst. But when she opened them again, she was alone in the room, the door intact and the wardrobe still in place. The footsteps were gone, and silence had returned to the house. To this day, she doesn't know what really happened that night, but she's never been able to sleep alone since. Martha had always enjoyed working as a babysitter. It was an easy job, and she loved kids, especially when they went to bed early, giving her some quiet time while their parents were out. That night, she had been hired to look after a 5-year-old boy named Ethan in a large, quiet house on the outskirts of town. The remote location was already enough to make her feel a little uneasy, but Martha tried to calm herself, telling herself everything would be fine. After giving Ethan a bath and putting him to bed, she went down to the spacious living room, sat on the couch, and turned on the TV to watch something light while waiting for the parents to return. Everything seemed normal until, suddenly, the intercom rang. She looked at the screen, confused. Who could it be at this hour? The image was grainy, but she could make out a tall figure wearing a hood that covered their face. A chill ran down Martha's spine. No one was supposed to be there, the parents had told her they weren't expecting any visitors. She hesitated for a moment, trying to decide what to do. When the intercom rang again, she heard a whispered voice from the other side, so low that she could barely make out the words. "Are you taking good care of him?" The sound of that voice made her heart race. There was no way anyone could know she was there watching the boy, right? With trembling hands, she grabbed her phone to call Ethan's parents, but before she could dial, something even stranger happened. The intercom let out a strange noise, as if it had been abruptly disconnected, and the screen went black for a few seconds before flickering back on, now showing only the empty front porch. Martha tried to convince herself it was just a prank or maybe a glitch in the system. But something inside her told her it wasn't that simple. She decided to check on Ethan to make sure he was okay, after all, that voice had specifically mentioned taking care of him. She hurried upstairs, trying to ignore the sound of her own footsteps echoing in the silence of the house. When she reached the boy's room, she slowly opened the door, expecting to find him sleeping peacefully. But her breath caught in her throat. The bed was empty. The bedroom window, one she was absolutely certain she had closed before coming downstairs, was wide open, the curtains swaying in the cold night breeze. Martha's heartbeat pounded in her ears as she frantically looked around the room for any sign of Ethan. But he was nowhere to be found. A rising sense of panic gripped her, but before she could even think about what to do next, her phone vibrated in her hand. A message from an unknown number. "Now it's your turn to play hide and seek." Martha felt ice flood her veins. Whoever this was, they knew exactly where she was and what was happening. And something told her this was no game. She immediately tried calling Ethan's parents, but the call wouldn't go through, as if the signal had been cut off. She looked again at the message, trying to process who could be behind this. The house, once eerily silent, now felt alive with strange noises, floorboards creaking, the wind rattling the windows, and something that sounded disturbingly like footsteps downstairs. She knew she had to find Ethan. But at the same time, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was watching her every move. With her heart pounding in her throat, she stepped out of the room and began searching the house, opening doors and whispering Ethan's name desperately. But the further she went, the stronger the sensation grew, she wasn't alone. Reaching the upstairs hallway, she suddenly heard a sound from the end of the corridor, a soft, childlike giggle. Martha froze. That laugh, was it Ethan? Or was it something else? She forced herself to move, slowly approaching the sound, trying to stay calm. But when she reached the last door, she realized it was slightly ajar. She pushed it open carefully. The room was completely dark, except for a faint glow coming from a forgotten toy on the floor, a small projector casting spinning stars onto the ceiling. And in the center of the room, something made her entire body tremble. A drawing, scribbled on the floor in red chalk. It showed a child holding the hand of a much larger figure. Next to the drawing, a single word was written. Run. Martha felt the air leave her lungs. That drawing hadn't been there before, she was sure of it. And that word. Run, was it a warning? She took a step back, but then she heard it, just behind her. A dragging sound. Like footsteps approaching. She spun around. Nothing. Just the empty hallway and the suffocating silence of the house. Her phone vibrated again. Another message from the unknown number. He's coming for you. Before she could process what that meant, she heard rapid footsteps coming up the stairs. Light, almost childlike. But they echoed strangely, as if coming from everywhere at once. Martha bolted from the room, desperately searching for a place to hide. But every door she opened led to an empty or pitch-black room. Finally, she spotted the hallway closet at the far end. She ran inside and shut the door, holding her breath. Inside, the only sound was the deafening thud of her own heartbeat. The footsteps stopped, right outside the closet. And then, a voice. A whisper, so close it felt like it was inside her head. I know where you are. Martha clamped a hand over her mouth, trying to suppress her panicked breathing. Then, the closet door began to creak open. Slowly. As if an invisible hand was pushing it. She gripped the handle with all her strength, but it was useless, something much stronger was on the other side. When the door finally swung open, she screamed, expecting to see the hooded figure or even Ethan. But there was no one. Only the empty hallway. Only the oppressive silence. Dizzy with fear, she ran downstairs, determined to escape. But when she reached the living room, everything was different. The once tidy space was now a mess, as if someone had turned everything upside down. And in the center of the table, a new drawing in red chalk. This time, it showed a figure that looked like her, being pulled away by an enormous hand. Beside the drawing, one final message. You should never have taken this job. Before she could react, the front door creaked open. Martha didn't hesitate. She ran out into the night, screaming for help, never daring to look back. When the police arrived, the house was completely empty. No sign of Ethan. No sign of anyone. To this day, Martha can't explain what happened that night. But she never took another babysitting job again. Lucas had always appreciated the tranquility of his solitary routine. He lived in a small but comfortable apartment, where every corner was familiar and safe. That night, after a long day at work, he followed his usual ritual. He took a hot shower to relax his tired muscles and went to the bathroom to brush his teeth. As he scrubbed the toothbrush against his teeth, he instinctively glanced up to observe his reflection in the mirror. But something was wrong. The image in the mirror blinked, or rather, he blinked, but the reflection seemed to lag a few milliseconds behind. Lucas frowned, thinking he might just be tired or imagining things. To test it, he quickly waved his hand back and forth and tilted his head. The reflection seemed slightly delayed, as if there were a glitch in the synchronization between him and the mirror. Rationalizing that it didn't make sense and that his mind was probably playing tricks on him, he tried to laugh it off and stepped away from the counter. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed something even more disturbing. While he moved to leave the bathroom, the reflection remained still, as if frozen in place, staring directly at him. His entire body froze. He slowly turned back toward the mirror, his heart pounding in his chest, and saw that the reflection was still there, motionless, looking at him with a neutral but intense expression, as if it knew something he didn't. Lucas felt a cold shiver run up his spine. He tried to convince himself that it was impossible. After all, a reflection couldn't act independently. But at the same time, he couldn't tear his eyes away from the mirror. The reflection stayed motionless, as if waiting for something. Suddenly, the bathroom lights flickered, pulsing irregularly, and for a moment everything went dark. When the light stabilized again, he saw something that made his heart stop. The reflection was smiling. It wasn't a normal smile, but something distorted and sinister, as if mocking him. Lucas instinctively recoiled, tripping over his own feet and falling onto the cold bathroom floor. He wanted to scream, but his voice seemed stuck in his throat. That's when the phone rang in the living room, cutting through the oppressive silence. The sudden sound made him jump, but it also gave him an excuse to get out of there. He quickly got up, keeping his eyes glued to the mirror until the last second, and ran to answer the call. When he picked up the phone, a distorted, metallic whisper came from the other end of the line, so faint it was barely audible, "Don't look back." Lucas froze, gripping the receiver so tightly his fingers began to tremble. He knew he should hang up, but something kept him there, paralyzed, as the voice repeated the phrase over and over, each time louder and more insistent. Before he could react, he heard a noise coming from the bathroom, slow, dragging footsteps, as if someone were walking toward him. The footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing closer and closer, and Lucas felt as though the air around him was becoming thicker, harder to breathe. He wanted to run, but his legs felt rooted to the spot. The voice on the phone continued repeating, "Don't look back," like a sinister mantra that only heightened his panic. Finally, summoning every ounce of courage he had, he hung up the phone and slowly turned around, expecting to see something terrible in front of him. But there was nothing there, just the empty, silent hallway. Or almost silent. He realized then that the sound of the footsteps was still present, only now they seemed to be coming from inside the apartment itself, as if circling around him. Lucas decided to go back to the bathroom, thinking he might find some logical explanation for what was happening. When he reached the door, he hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The mirror was still there, but now something about it seemed different. The reflection was no longer smiling, instead, it was leaning forward, its hands pressed against the surface of the glass, as if trying to break through. And the eyes of the reflection were fixed on his, but they weren't his own. They were dark, hollow, like black holes sucking away any remaining calm he had left. Before he could react, the reflection slowly moved its lips, forming a single word without making a sound: run. The word run echoed in Lucas's mind like a silent scream. He stumbled backward, tripping over his feet again, but this time he didn't care about falling. His only thought was to get out of there, out of the bathroom, out of the apartment, away from whatever that thing was. But when he tried to run toward the living room door, he realized something was wrong. The apartment seemed different, the walls were darker, the furniture cast distorted shadows that moved even without a breeze. It was as if the space itself had changed, transforming into something hostile and unfamiliar. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something in the hallway mirror, an indistinct, almost transparent figure following him. Lucas tried to ignore it and kept running toward the front door, praying it would be unlocked. When he finally managed to turn the handle, he heard a sound from behind him, a low, guttural laugh that seemed to come from within the walls. He instinctively looked back, despite the warning from the phone, and saw his reflection in the hallway mirror again. But now, he wasn't alone in the reflection. Behind him, in the glass, stood a hooded figure with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce his soul. Before he could scream, the door swung open by itself, revealing the pitch-black corridor of the building. A voice whispered directly into his ear, though there was no one beside him, "You should have left already." Lucas didn't think twice. He bolted down the building's hallway, not daring to look back, his heart hammering in his chest as if it wanted to escape his body. The sound of his own footsteps echoed through the empty floors, but he could swear there was another sound accompanying him, heavier, slower footsteps, as if something were right behind him, deliberately keeping its distance. When he reached the ground floor, he pushed the exit door with all his strength and ran out into the street, where a few people were still walking under the lamplights. He tried to ask for help, but his voice came out broken, as if even he didn't understand what he was saying. When he finally calmed down enough to look back, he noticed that the windows of his apartment were dark, as if no one had lived there for years. The next day, when he returned to the building accompanied by a police officer, the apartment was completely empty, no furniture, no sign that anyone had lived there recently. But what truly chilled him to the bone was the bathroom mirror. It was still there, intact, with a single red scratch etched into the surface that seemed to form a sentence: "I've always been here." Since then, Lucas has never been able to look at a mirror without feeling that same spine-chilling shiver.